Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us. My name is Ben Parker. Welcome to Sports and Money, where we're going to cover a wide range of topics based on, you guessed it, sports and money. Now, I apologize if this first video isn't the spectacular quality you might be used to from other people, but we will improve it as we go along, and thank you so much for watching with us tonight. Our first topic that we're going to cover on this show is Aaron Donald of the Los Angeles Rams. Now, usually I don't care a whole lot about contracts and holdouts and things of that nature, but in this case, Aaron Donald presents not only a player who is unique in his talent and his abilities, but also presents kind of a synopsis of one of the little flaws that might be occurring with the CBA and the NFL. That's something we'll get into a little bit later. I want to step back and reset a little bit for those of you who either A, may not be familiar with Aaron Donald that much, or B, may not be that used to the NFL CBA and the way the rookie contracts works. First of all, if you are lucky enough to be drafted in the NFL in the first round, you are going to have a 4-year contract. And while that presents a lot of money for average people, it puts you in a very reduced salary structure compared to what you can make as a free agent years later if your career develops in the NFL. So this is a great thing for teams because they get the rights to players for 4 years at a very reduced rate. If the player is at all worth having, if he's a starter or even just comes in and plays as a solid backup, they get a tremendous amount of value compared to what they would pay on the open market for a free agent. Now, even more so for first-round draft picks, because they come with a 5th-year option that belongs to the team. So if the player is worth having and the team wants to pick them up for that 5th year, they can do that without really any say-so from the player. Now, that 5th-year contract is worth a good bit more than years 1 through 4. Even so, that 5th-year contract, the salary that comes with it, is very small compared to what the player could be making on the open market. And like I said, this is a great deal for teams. This is a great deal for general managers who are looking for low labor to stockpile their rosters with. Now, along comes a player like Aaron Donald. Now, Aaron Donald is not just a good player. Aaron Donald is a great player. He made the Pro Bowl in his 2nd year and his 3rd year. He was an All-Pro in his 2nd year and 3rd year. And this guy is arguably, I'm not going to get into much of a talent evaluation here tonight, but this guy is arguably the best defensive player in the game. You could even make the case that from a pure numbers standpoint, he could be considered the best player in the game. It's not an argument I want to get into tonight, but certainly no one would argue, the Rams would not argue, no one would argue that Aaron Donald is an elite player, and he's only played 3 seasons so far. The theory is that he would only get better as time goes along. Now, herein lies the problem. The Rams, as they have every right to do, as most teams in the NFL have every right to do and like to do with their players, the Rams would love to keep him under this contract for 4 years, pick up the 5th-year option, and then possibly and conceivably even franchise tag him on the 6th year. The 6-year franchise tag would be very expensive, but they would still come out in the long run, be much cheaper than a 4 or 5-year contract that they'd have to pay him, not to mention the guaranteed money that they would be running the risk of him possibly getting injured or something like that. So the Rams would love to keep him under contract for 6 years. They know that's not going to happen. They know that Aaron Donald is too good of a player. So Aaron Donald comes along, and the question would be, why hold out? Why hold out? Because as a player in the NFL, you really have no other options. You are largely at the mercy of your team and their decision making about you, and your really only recourse a lot of times is just take yourself off the field. Now, certainly the Rams are doing nothing wrong by refusing to put out a big contract for Aaron Donald, but at the same time, Aaron Donald has every right to want a bigger contract based on his play because it has been spectacular. So he has a great agent, Brian France, with Creative Artists Agency, and they've devised a plan wherein they're going to hold out all during training camp. Now, this is a big deal for a guy like Aaron Donald. Aaron Donald takes the game very seriously. Aaron Donald plays hard. He practices hard. He videos hard. Everything Aaron Donald does is really devoted to making himself a better NFL player. And so for him to be missing training camp, for him to be missing workouts, for him to actually miss the first game of his career this season is a really, really big deal. And now he is back. For those of you who don't know, he is back. He'll be playing probably on this Sunday in the second game of the season. But for him to be missing, that's a really big deal. Why hold out? It's sending a message. Brian France, Creative Artist Industries, Aaron Donald, they got together, they made a decision. We're going to send a message to the Rams. Not that we have anything against the organization, but it's time for us to be talking a new contract. Now, Aaron Donald is worth more money. Nobody would argue against that, not even the Rams themselves was. That brings us to the important question, and that is, how much do the Rams value Aaron Donald? And that's not an easy question. Let's put ourselves in the Rams executive offices for a few minutes and see how easy of a question that is. Can they afford Aaron Donald? The answer is yes. They can absolutely move things around salary cap wise. They can figure out what they want to do with some other players. They can cut other players. The quarterback question, they're not going to have to pay a lot of money to their quarterback for a couple more seasons if the quarterback that they have on the roster now even pans out and becomes worth a major contract. So for the Rams, the question is not, can we afford Aaron Donald? The question is, do we want to pay him a very long-term contract, especially when we don't have to? There is nothing obligating the Rams to offer him a large contract at this point. It is simply, at a certain point, it becomes good faith and good negotiations. So while almost all the leverage is with the Rams and with any NFL team in this situation, the one leverage that Aaron Donald does have is that he does not have to play. He can take himself off the field, and he did that for the first game. Now, the Rams have said, Aaron Donald, negotiate with us in good faith. We will take care of you. We will promise to put together good negotiations with you. So for now, both sides are talking nice. For now, both sides are trying to work, trying to come to an agreement, and I don't have any real doubt that at some point they will reach an agreement. Aaron Donald can get the money he wants, but do the Rams want to pay him that money, or will it be another team? At this point, the Rams could still trade Aaron Donald and get a decent amount of value out of him. That value would go down as the season progresses and as we get into his fifth year, because any team trading for him would not necessarily have the rights to him for as long. So the Rams have to ask themselves, not, is Aaron Donald a great player? He is a great player. They would acknowledge that. They don't have to ask themselves, is Aaron Donald a hard-working player? He is. They know that. They don't have to ask themselves, is Aaron Donald the kind of player who will commit to this team and commit to winning? They know that he is. But the problem that you run into is that when you pay somebody on the defensive line the kind of money that amounts to quarterback money, or maybe even slightly higher, then you're really going to start restricting yourself under the salary cap in your ability to pay other players and build the roster the way you would want to. Best example of this is the New England Patriots, of course, with Tom Brady. He himself is willing to take a much lower salary every season simply to help the team build a roster around him that will win. So in essence, the New England Patriots do not have this problem because they're not having to pay Tom Brady the amount of money that he's really worth, and they're able to build the roster up in other places, and he seems relatively happy with that because he's getting to win and he's getting endorsement money from other places as well. Now, I don't know if Aaron Donald would be happy with that or not. Aaron Donald may be wanting top money, and he's got every right to want that and to provide for his family off into the future, and he's got every right to say, hey, I have far outperformed my contract and I would really like a new and better deal right now. So the question becomes, for the Rams, do we value Aaron Donald enough to give him this money and deal with the quarterback question, the salary that we're going to pay him in 2 or 3 seasons. Can we build a winning roster financially with Aaron Donald holding down such a huge contract that he might be getting on the open market? Can we build a roster around him with that kind of contract on the defensive side? Now, for most teams, the answer is no. For most teams, the answer is no. Now that brings us to another consideration for Aaron Donald. Aaron Donald may not be able to make the money that he deserves and still play for a top elite team. There are plenty of teams who, if Aaron Donald hit the open market in a couple of seasons, would be willing to pay him the top money that he is worth and give him every penny of what he deserves. And I'm sure Brian France and Creative Artists Industries would love that. Perhaps that's what Aaron Donald wants. But those teams simply might not be able to pay him that money, plus pay a quarterback, a top quarterback, what he is worth, and build up the roster. You'd then be forced to either pay a quarterback a lower amount to have a kind of a game manager at quarterback, or you're going to be forced to have a big money quarterback, a big money defensive tackle, and try to figure out your way on all the other positions on the team, paying a good bit less than what you would like to pay for starters that starters get around the league. So these are the questions. The negotiations, I'm sure, will carry on for a large part of the time. I wouldn't really, to be honest, and I don't have any insight on this, I really wouldn't expect a big contract anytime soon. I figure probably 2 or 3 months at least. It may even drag into next off season. And I'm sure that's not really what AD and Creative Artists Industries want, but that may be what ends up happening, because these are not easy questions for the Rams. These are not easy questions necessarily for Aaron Donald. If Aaron Donald wants to play for a winner, then he might have to make the Tom Brady decision that I am willing to take less so that we can pay our quarterback in a couple of seasons, so that we can pay other people on the team, such as possibly Todd Gurley, if we decide to give him big money for his production. Other players like that. This is a question that Aaron Donald's got to ask himself as well, and it's different for every player. Every player has to answer these questions if they're going to play for a winner, or if they're going to make the money that they really deserve and can make on the free agent market. So these are the things. Now, I've covered a little bit there of the negotiation side for both Aaron Donald and the Rams. Where I want to end up, though, tonight is the collective bargaining agreement for the NFL. Now, before you get to feeling too sorry for Aaron Donald or for any of the players in the NFL, don't forget that this was collectively bargained. The Players Union sat down with the NFL and they collectively bargained this, and one of the things that was put in place a number of years ago was this rookie contract scale. And the biggest reason for that was you have players who were getting drafted into the NFL number 1 or number 2 or number 3 overall, and they were getting these massive contracts, and it was really dwarfing the contracts of some very good veteran players. And then players farther down in the first round were making minuscule sums compared to what the number 1 or number 2 overall draft pick was making. So that was really where this rookie wage scale came from in the first place. So this is collectively bargaining. But for players like Aaron Donald, who truly do outstrip and outperform their contract very quickly, and he has, there's no question about it, the current CBA does not really work for Aaron Donald. He is essentially more or less trapped under this contract for 5 and even potentially 6 or 7 seasons, depending on what kind of hardball the Rams want to play. And I'm not trying to belittle the Rams or their organization in any way. They've certainly got every right to do this. But if you're Aaron Donald and you're looking at the possible risk of injury, or let's say you play 7 seasons for the Rams, and during seasons 6 and 7 you make a boatload of money, but after 7 seasons maybe your knees wear out, maybe your energy wears out, maybe you're starting to have considerations about concussions and things of that nature. Maybe after 7 seasons you're just done. You have not made the money that you really could have made being such a great player at such a high level. So for him, and rightfully so, after 3 years, he's looking for a brand new contract, a bigger contract, and a contract that really shows his level of play and ability. So, for him, the CBA just does not work like it should. I think of the Major League Baseball and their system of arbitration. After a certain point, and I'm not getting the number of years for Major League Baseball that this kicks in at, but at a certain point for Major League Baseball players, if they are outstripping their contract, if they are outplaying the contract that they agreed to or that they got drafted under, they have the right to go before an arbitrator. And an arbitrator, a judge, will decide between the number that the team puts out and the number that the player puts out. And really for the NFL, this would be a very good kind of a middle ground for teams who don't yet want to pay a lot of money, a lot of long-term guaranteed money to their players, and yet a way for the player to start making more money earlier in his career that he is really worth. In Aaron Donald's case, if he were to go before an arbitrator or a judge, and maybe not a big ask, but if he were to have the ability, they don't in the NFL, they don't have this at all, but if they were able in years 3 or 4 to go before an arbitrator or a judge, instead of making I think it's $3 million in his 4th season, he might be able to earn $7 or $8 million in his 4th season, which would still be a decent value for the Rams. On top of that, in his 5th season, instead of making, I want to say it's going to be $7 million in his 5th year option. Instead of making $7 million, he could be looking at potentially making $10 or $11 million. It's a huge jump for him. The team doesn't have to commit to a very long-term contract. Now, you might say, well, if the Rams can play hardball, why don't they? If the Rams have most, if not all of the leverage, the only leverage that Aaron Donald has is pull himself off the field, why wouldn't they? Well, you create a number of problems when you do that. Number one, you run the risk of creating a very dissatisfied player with a great player like Aaron Donald, and that can boil over into the locker room. And listen, I'm not trying to say that Aaron Donald would respond this way, but a number of players would, and rightfully so. If you know that you're worth more money and you're not getting that money, then it certainly can create a lot of dissatisfaction. So you have that risk, first of all, of that player being very dissatisfied and coming to camp unhappy, playing through the season unhappy. And it can create a lot of dissatisfaction in the locker room, among teammates and among players. Also, if the fight gets public, if the fight gets nasty, and sometimes it does with negotiations between team and players, they can give you a very black eye in the public. You can start to look bad. Also, listen, you run the risk, and this is true no matter what, no matter the big contract or not, there is the risk of injury. There is the risk for Aaron Donald that he could get injured in his 4th or 5th season and never see that money at all. So while that would be a reason for the Rams not to give him a big contract, keep in mind this is real life players like Aaron Donald. This is important to them to have this ability to make this money in their career. Now, one option for the Rams, if they decide that Aaron Donald is not worth to them paying large money to, because they can't build a winner with that kind of salary on the defensive side, one option is to trade him, and now would be a very good time to do it. I don't think that's going to happen at this point. If it were going to happen, they probably would have already made that decision back in the summer. So now that he's on the team for the start of the season, that's usually where you see players stay in the NFL. So I wouldn't expect that to happen. You could possibly see it next year if the Rams have decided during the off season between the 4th and the 5th seasons that they're just not going to give him this kind of money. Let's go ahead and trade him. Whoever we trade him to would have him for 1 season of the 5th year option. Then that team would have the right to either franchise him and get him for 2 seasons, or at that point they could begin some serious negotiations with whatever team traded for him. The Rams could still get some pretty good value for him, and even after this season, they could still get some pretty decent value for him if they decide that they don't want to give him that kind of contract. So it's a fascinating thing. Like I said, I don't usually care a whole lot for holdouts and contract negotiations and things of that nature, but in this instance, Aaron Donald is such a spectacular player, and the Rams haven't usually moved to Los Angeles. They're a team of interest as well, even though they haven't really started a winning culture there yet. Aaron Donald is such a tremendous player that it really creates kind of a fascinating avenue. So maybe in the next few years, as the players go over a new collective bargaining agreement with the NFL, maybe this will be one of the things they bring up. I don't know if it's anywhere on their considerations. It may be number 101 on their list of important things to them, but for players like Aaron Donald, arbitration certainly would be a way to help not only the player get more money, but it would allow the team to pay the player more money without getting into these very large contracts that players such as Ndamukong Suh make, where you just have this exorbitant amount of money that's eating up a large amount of salary cap on the defensive side. Listen, I'm done for the night. I want to thank Spot Track. They do a tremendous job. I love their website. I get a lot of the contract information from them. And I want to thank you for listening tonight. We'll put out some more videos here in the future. If you've got any questions, feel free to hit us up with it. If you've got any criticism, shoot us down with it. Thank you for listening. Have a great night.